Welcome to Spanglish Friends, the podcast for true beginner Spanish learners.
Hola amigos, I'm Val, your co-host and experienced Spanish teacher from Venezuela.
And I'm Em, your Australian co-host who's been learning Spanish for 10 years.
Our goal is simple, to get you confident listening and speaking in beginner Spanish with content you'll actually use in real-life conversations.
Join the Spanish Friends community by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts and following us on social media at Spanglish_friends. Let's get started.
Comencemos.
Hello, Spanglish friends. Hola a todos, and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast.
Hola amigos, ¿cómo están? How are you all? Bienvenidos al episodio 2.
Yes, we are so glad to have you back.
If you are new to Spanglish Friends and just tuning in to the first time, welcome. You might wish to go back to episode 1, where Em and I introduced ourselves and told you a bit about our language learning journeys. Plus, shared how you can find out if this is the right podcast for you. So if you haven't already, go check that out before diving into today's podcast.
Absolutely, Val. And in today's episode, we want to set you up for success in your language learning journey. We want to make sure you actually end up being able to say with confidence someday in the future from now, I understand and I can speak Spanish. But the question you're probably asking yourself is, how do you actually navigate learning Spanish from scratch? To answer this, firstly, today we need to debunk some common language learning myths because there are so many out there that you need to know aren't true. Then we're going to share some top recommendations as to what language learning tools, e.g. apps, etc., you can actually use to learn Spanish.
Great. Love it. Let's jump into part 1, debunking the myth of learning Spanish as an absolute beginner. What do you think?
Absolutely. Let's do it. So myth number 1 of learning Spanish, learning a second language. So many people, particularly on social media online, claim that you can learn a language in 30 days or 3 weeks. But Val, is this true? How long does it actually take to learn Spanish?
Great question. Firstly, if you give basic information about yourself to another person, technically, you speak Spanish. That doesn't mean you can actually keep a conversation with a native Spanish speaker. Those are two very different things.
Indeed.
I'd say that depends a lot on each student's learning capability and their time availability. You heard us speak last week about the Common European Framework for Language, which has 6 levels. The first are the beginner, A1 and A2 levels, where you should be able to give basic information about yourself or others. Then you have intermediate, B1 or B2 levels, where you should be able to speak using different time verbs, request more specific information, and have a broader vocabulary. Finally, you have C1 and C2 levels. At that level, you should be able to have like a fluent conversation with with native speakers, using slang and being proficient to understand different contexts during a conversation. It depends on what level you want to reach, the time that would take you to get there. By the way, let me do a public shout out to our host, Emmy, because she has reached that level in Spanish, C1. Felicitaciones, Em. Congrats.
Oh, thanks, Val. But look, I do want to emphasize and stress, this was not an overnight achievement, getting to that C1 level of Spanish. It took me probably 7-8 years to get to this truly advanced level of Spanish.
Yes, it's really about the time you dedicate to learning Spanish. I've met
Absolutely.
students, for example, that in 6 months can get B1, B2 level and easily speak. On the other hand, I've met others that it takes them 2 or even 3 years to get those levels.
Yeah, and I think this level of transparency, busting this myth, is so important learning any new language, learning Spanish as a beginner, so you don't feel disheartened after 30 days when you think, oh, I know how to speak yet. It took me 3 years of classes until I felt confident to start speaking 3 whole years of learning. It really only clicked for me when I started to take classes that were only spoken in Spanish. I was in Australia taking classes that were only spoken in Spanish. So these online ads that claim you can learn a language in 30 days, I also question what is their definition of learn a language.
Exactly. To what level are you talking about, to what level of the speaking, reading,
Yes.
writing, and listening proficiency?
Yes, there's such different skills, and I really feel like it's such rubbish. Like, okay, sure, if you have every waking hour of your day to dedicate to learning Spanish, yeah, sure. Like maybe a tiny 2% of the population, right, could maybe go and do that. But honestly,
Totally, yeah.
it was not me. I work a 9-to-5 job weekdays. I have a life to live, hobbies outside of work, even with 1 hour of class a week. And I've done that continuously now for 10 years. It took me 3 years before I said to myself, okay, I'm actually speaking Spanish rather than just saying chunks of words or phrases like a Pokemon. Language learning takes time. And I think that's something you really need to tell yourself if you're starting this language learning journey. It's not achieved overnight, and that's okay. It takes time and effort, and you need to be prepared to put in that time and effort if you want to be able to turn around and say, hey, I have learnt Spanish.
Yes, this is so true. And that brings me to myth number 2, that you have to get to this advanced level to actually know Spanish. It's completely not true. Your goal might just be to have enough to get by whilst traveling, to speak to your grandparents in simple Spanish, and etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember, Val, about 3 years into my Spanish learning journey, I started to get really disheartened. For a while there, I thought, yes, I'm learning Spanish, I know Spanish. And then I felt really disheartened. And it was because everyone around me in my class was really good at Spanish grammar and knowing the real technical stuff of Spanish. And I just wasn't there yet. I kept constantly comparing myself to others and thinking, I'm just never going to know Spanish.
Okay.
But then I reflected and I said, well, hang on, that's not actually my goal, learning Spanish, to be a grammar expert. My goal is to be able to have a really simple conversation with my nephew in Spanish, with my family that live in South America. That was my goal. When I started thinking about this goal, focusing on achieving this goal by practicing conversations rather than spending time laboring over how to conjugate verbs and grammar, really got motivated. And this is when I actually was using the right tools to achieve my goals.
That's great. Yeah, it's about having clear goals. So friends, you need to have a tangible goal to work towards. And it needs to be your goal, no anyone else. This will keep you motivated and learn the right things to get you there, right?
Exactly. And the goal that you set, it needs to be a SMART goal. It needs to be specific, it needs to be measurable, it needs to be actionable, it needs to be reasonable, and it needs to be timely. For example, I'm going to learn Spanish. That's so vague. Like, to what level, for what purpose are you going to be learning it for? How are you going to get there? What language learning tools are you going to use? Instead, an example of a SMART goal would be, I'm going to be able to have a conversation in basic Spanish by the end of 2025. And I'm going to do that by listening to Spanglish Friends once a week and taking a 1-hour Spanish class every week, right? That is a really tangible goal.
Love this. It's a great example of a realistic and achievable goal. Finally, the last myth that I am always busting is, I need to be fully immersed in Spanish to truly know Spanish.
Yes, so many people say or have said to me before, oh, you only get fluent in another language, in Spanish, by traveling or living in a Spanish-speaking country. And I just want to say, I am living proof that this myth is not true. It is not true. I spoke Spanish fluently well before I did my 6-month trip to South America last year. I had been learning Spanish purely in Australia, an English-speaking country, for 8 years before I went and traveled and spent full days in Spanish. I didn't have Spanish around me in my day-to-day life. In my house, it's not spoken. I started regular classes at night school during my university days and have stayed relentless with weekly classes, an hour online every week since. And when I arrived in South America, I could speak Spanish. Sure, I had gaps and things to learn like slang, but if a native speaker was speaking to me at a reasonable pace, I could listen and respond to them.
Thought that you're the living proof, Emmy, of that completely. You can learn Spanish whenever you are in the world. Granted, you have set a goal that makes sense for you, and you are using the right learning tools to achieve it. That's important.
So important.
What language tools do we recommend as a beginner?
Let's dive into what language tools we recommend, what is going to help you actually learn Spanish. So the first language learning tool is obviously to listen to the Spanglish Friends podcast on a regular basis. Obviously. But seriously, get yourself into a regular routine where you tune in to continue leveling up your skills. Listening is so important early on in your language learning journey, so you can get familiar with pronunciation, sentence structure, accent, inflection. And it's important that you're listening to a podcast that suits your level of Spanish so you don't feel disheartened. But again, you don't want something that's too simple. We want to be in that nice Goldilocks zone where maybe 70% of the stuff you know and 30% is new content. So it's not overwhelming, but you're still advancing. You're still testing yourself. You're not staying stagnant in your progress. And this is what we hope to be for you with the Spanglish Friends.
We really hope that exactly. Top tip number 2 is take Spanish classes. This could be in person or online. They could be individually or in a group.
Yes, and I know some people will be thinking, I just don't have time to take a Spanish class, a half an hour class or an hour class. But I'd encourage you to think, how many hours did you spend scrolling away on social media this week? Just imagine if you used one of those hours to do a Spanish class every week. Yeah. And I can say that I was definitely a prolific scroller in the past, but changing this mindset and saying, look, I can have the time. These hours add up over the year. If you do one class a week, that's 52 hours of Spanish you've then done in a year. That's a substantial amount of Spanish. It's that consistency of learning that is really going to build your Spanish listening and speaking proficiency.
You are right. You need to supplement your learning. You are in a group, for example, you can practice with them what you are learning, and also their questions and their mistakes can help you as well. While having a private tutor is going to give you like a safe place where you can progress in your own pace. Besides that, a teacher could adapt to your level and needs. Again, you don't need to take classes every day, but I find that at least once a week can help you boost your results.
Yes, for sure. And our learning tool tip number 3 is to find friends to speak to in Spanish. Again, you might be thinking, this is impossible for me. I live in a predominantly English-speaking country. Like, how do I find friends that speak Spanish?
I know that you found a great way online to make Spanish friends, some of who you have now even met in person overseas. So this is important. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so my experience was during COVID times. We'll repress those memories, but during peak COVID, I downloaded this app called Hello Talk. And I just want to make it clear we're not affiliated with this app. This is just purely my experience here. I would describe this app, Hello Talk, as it's like Tinder for friends who want to learn languages. It's a language exchange. You can match up with Spanish speakers from around the world who want to share with you about their culture and life and also want to learn English so you can speak a bit of Spanglish together. Through this app, no lie, I've met probably 7 or 8 friends that I regularly keep in touch with to this day, 5 years afterwards, which is amazing. And some of them I even had the pleasure of staying with when I ended up visiting and traveling around South America. I have learnt so much talking to these friends, right? because you learn about each Spanish-speaking country's different slang words, how to talk over text with your friends in Spanish. That's a whole skill in itself. I got to have video calls with my Spanish friends, which is amazing. That's when you start to learn that colloquial, conversational Spanish, not just stuff you're learning from your textbooks, your podcasts, your classes. So I'd highly recommend finding an app like this to help take your Spanish speaking and listening to that next level, finding some friends and finding that safe place to just make mistakes, have a go and have that beautiful exchange of cultures.
I love this story, Em, and we are sure you can find people who would love to have a conversation and help you to start speaking and understanding Spanish.
Your own Spanglish friends. That's the way.
Exactly. So, amigos, there you have it. We have debunked the most common language learning myth and recommended what learning tools to use as a beginner to actually learn Spanish.
That's it. We hope you found today's episode super handy. Now we're going to do our challenge of the day, our reto of the day. Reto is a word in Spanish that means challenge. What we want you to do today, Spanglish friends, is head to the comments and share what's been working for you or what hasn't been working for you in your language learning journey so far. This could be of Spanish or another language, or share with us what's your smart Spanish learning goal. What's the specific goal that you have in mind that you're looking to achieve? We'd love to know because this will help us in tailoring our content for you.
Great, Reto, Emmy. I can't wait to hear from you all as we start growing our beautiful community.
Next episode, episode 3, we're going to begin our actual first episode of Spanish content. We're going to absolute basics and we're going to be discussing how do you actually introduce yourself in beginner's Spanish.
Amazing. I'm looking forward to diving into our first topic. We'll see you all next time.
See you next time. Hasta la próxima, amigos.
Thank you for listening to Spanglish Friends. We are both so proud of the time you're investing to level up your Spanish listening and speaking skills.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, follow us and give the show a rating wherever you listen to podcasts. Or even better, tell a friend about the show. It's how we can help even more people on their Spanish learning journeys and continue to grow our awesome, supportive community.
Don't forget to check out our socials, including Instagram and TikTok at Spanglish_friends for even more beginner Spanish fun.
Congratulations on taking another step today towards your Spanish learning goals. Ciao, Spanglish amigos. Until next time.
Hasta la próxima, amigos.